The CEO boss dragged her husband out and told everyone, "She's under my protection now." Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The air in the lobby of Morty Enterprises was a manufactured climate of success, chilled to a precise temperature that felt like breathing in money. It smelled of polished marble, expensive leather, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the towering monolith of servers humming silently behind a wall of smoked glass. For Alara Vance, it smelled like her last chance. She clutched the portfolio against her chest, the smooth cardboard a flimsy shield against the crushing weight of the moment. Inside were the architectural designs for the new Elysian Tower, a project that could redefine the city's skyline and, more importantly, redefine her life. It was her escape route, her declaration of independence from a life that had slowly, insidiously, become a prison. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the serene, almost silent efficiency of the corporate cathedral around her. She just needed to get through the next hour, to present her vision to the board, to secure the contract that would finally give her the means to walk away from Marcus for good. Her focus shattered when a familiar, dreaded hand closed around her upper arm. The grip was not merely firm. It was a brand, a possessive claim that sent a spike of ice-cold dread through her veins. "Leaving so soon, darling?" Marcus's voice was a low murmur beside her ear, a silken tone he reserved for public spaces, a sound far more threatening than any shout. He was dressed impeccably in a suit she knew he couldn't afford, his smile a predatory curve that did not reach his cold, assessing eyes. He had followed her. Of course he had. He had a sixth sense for the moments she felt a flicker of hope, an almost supernatural ability to appear and extinguish it with his suffocating presence. She tried to pull her arm away, a small, futile gesture that only made his fingers dig deeper into her flesh, a painful reminder of his ownership. "This is my meeting, Marcus. You have no business being here." "Our business is my business," he corrected, his voice still a stage whisper, though its edge was sharp enough to cut. "You think you can just run off and play pretend with the big boys, build your little towers in the sky? You need to be reminded of your place, Alara. Your place is with me." He was creating a scene, a subtle one, but a scene nonetheless. The receptionist's polite smile had frozen, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. A security guard by the far wall shifted his weight, his gaze flicking between them with professional disinterest that was quickly becoming concern. This was his goal: to humiliate her, to destabilize her before the most important meeting of her life, to prove that no matter where she went, his leash was still around her neck. Her carefully constructed composure began to crumble, the words for her presentation turning to ash in her mind, replaced by the familiar, frantic litany of appeasement and retreat. It was then that the world seemed to hold its breath. The soft chime of the private elevator arriving in the main lobby was a sound so insignificant, yet it commanded the absolute attention of every person present. The brushed steel doors slid open with a whisper, and from within stepped Dante Morty. He was a man who did not need to command a room. Rooms simply reconfigured themselves around his presence. Dressed in a dark, tailored suit that seemed forged from shadows, he moved with a preternatural stillness, his very existence a study in contained power. His eyes, dark and impossibly perceptive, swept the lobby in a single, comprehensive glance, and Alara felt the weight of that gaze like a physical touch. He saw everything: the fear in her eyes, the desperate tension in her body, the proprietary cruelty in her husband's grip. For a long, terrifying moment, his gaze locked with hers, and she felt stripped bare, her carefully guarded secrets laid out for his inspection. He began to walk toward them, his steps measured and silent on the marble floor. The security guard straightened to his full height. Marcus, for the first time, seemed to realize the magnitude of the attention he had drawn. He loosened his grip slightly, but it was too late. Dante Morty stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable, a mask of cold neutrality that was somehow more intimidating than open anger. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was not a question so much as a demand for order in his domain. Panic seized Alara, cold and sharp. An accusation, a plea for help, would mean the end of her career. Marcus would spin it, paint her as hysterical, unstable. Morty Enterprises would not want to be involved in a domestic dispute. All her work, all her hope would evaporate. She needed to salvage this to make it go away. The words came out before she could stop them, a desperate, pathetic improvisation. "No, no, Mr. Morty, not at all," she said, forcing a brittle smile to her lips. "This is my cousin, Marcus, just a silly family disagreement. He was just wishing me luck. I apologize for the disturbance." The lie was flimsy, pathetic, and she knew it. The word cousin hung in the air, absurd and transparent. Marcus looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly replaced by a smug curl of his lip. He was happy to play along with any lie that kept her trapped. Dante Morty's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He looked from the faint, blossoming marks of Marcus's fingers on her arm to the defiant terror in her eyes, and he understood. He saw the lie for what it was, a shield, a desperate act of self-preservation from a woman with no other weapons at her disposal. A flicker of something unreadable, respect, perhaps, or a cold, predatory interest, passed through his gaze. He chose to accept the fiction she had created. He turned his full attention to Marcus, and the temperature in the lobby seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "Your cousin has an important meeting to prepare for," Dante said, his voice flat and final. "Your family reunion is over. Leave." It was not a request. It was an execution of his will. Marcus, for all his blustering arrogance, withered under that gaze. He saw the truth of the man he was facing, the barely concealed lethality that clung to Dante Morty like a cologne. With a final, venomous glare at Alara, he turned and walked away, his retreat as swift as it was cowardly. Dante watched him go, his expression unchanging until the glass doors slid shut behind Marcus. Then he turned back to Alara. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken truths. She stood trembling, the portfolio clutched to her chest, waiting for the judgment. For the dismissal she was sure would come. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice softer now but no less commanding. He gestured to his personal assistant, a severe-looking woman who had appeared at his side. "My schedule has just become unexpectedly complicated. Please have Ms. Vance's presentation rescheduled. My office will contact you directly to arrange a new time. We will provide a car." He held her gaze for a moment longer, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He knew. He knew she had lied. He knew what Marcus was, and he was giving her an escape, not just from the meeting, but from the moment. As he turned and walked back toward his private elevator, leaving her standing in the echoing silence of the lobby, Alara understood that her life had just become irrevocably entangled with a man far more powerful and far more dangerous than the one she was trying to escape. The lie she had told to save herself had not set her free. It had simply tethered her to a new and infinitely more formidable center of gravity. The summons came 2 days later, not as an email from a scheduling department, but as a direct call from Dante Morty's executive assistant. The new time for her presentation was not in a corporate boardroom with a panel of executives, but at 7 in the evening, in his private office on the penthouse floor. The instructions were precise. A car would be waiting for her at 6:30. The implication was clear. This was not about the Elysian Tower project anymore. This was about the lie she had told in the lobby, and the man who had chosen to believe it. Alara spent the intervening 48 hours in a state of suspended anxiety, the fear of Marcus's retaliation warring with the unnerving anticipation of her meeting with Dante. Marcus had been strangely silent, a worrying omen that meant he was plotting, not surrendering. The silence from Dante's end was more profound, a vacuum of power that she felt pulling her in, a force she was both terrified of and inexplicably drawn to. She knew accepting this meeting was a dangerous gamble, a step into a world whose rules she did not understand, but the alternative, returning to the suffocating confines of her life with Marcus, was no longer a possibility. The glimpse of another world, of a man who could dismiss her tormentor with a single word, had fundamentally altered her perception of what was possible. The car that arrived was a sleek black sedan with windows so dark they seemed to drink the light. The ride was silent, a smooth glide through the city's arteries, delivering her back to the gleaming steel and glass tower that now felt less like a beacon of hope and more like the heart of a vast, unknowable territory. The private elevator ascended without a sound, opening directly into a space that was less an office and more a testament to absolute power. It was a vast, minimalist expanse, with a floor-to-ceiling wall of glass offering a breathtaking panorama of the city lights glittering like a carpet of fallen stars. A single, massive desk of dark, polished wood stood like an altar at its center, and behind it, watching her with that same unnerving stillness, was Dante Morty. He was not working. He was simply waiting for her, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, the city his backdrop. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air. "Thank you for coming, please." He gestured to one of the 2 leather chairs that faced his desk, a seat that felt more like an interrogation chair than a guest. She walked across the polished floor, her heels clicking a small, sharp rhythm in the cavernous silence, and sat, placing her portfolio on her lap like a shield. He did not sit down. Instead, he moved to the window, his back to her for a moment as he looked out at his kingdom. The designs in that portfolio are, I am told, revolutionary, innovative, the kind of vision that could make Morty Enterprises another $1 billion. He turned back to face her, his eyes dark and piercing. "But we are not here to discuss them tonight. We are here to discuss your cousin." The words were spoken without inflection, a simple statement of fact that stripped away all her pretenses. Alara's throat went dry. "I don't know what you mean." The denial was weak, a pathetic defense against a man who dealt in truths, however brutal. He gave a small, humorless smile, a slight curve of his lips that held no warmth. "Do not insult my intelligence, Alara. I know a cornered animal when I see one, and I know a predator. The man in the lobby was not your cousin." He moved from the window and sat in the chair opposite her, leaning forward slightly, closing the distance between them. The sheer force of his presence was overwhelming. "I had my people look into you, and into him, Marcus Vance, a failed stockbroker with a taste for expensive things and a mountain of debt. Some of that debt, I see, is to men my family knows, men who do not appreciate being kept waiting." He let that information settle in the air, a quiet threat that implicated not just Marcus, but now her. "I also saw the police reports, the dropped charges. The hospital visits explained away as household accidents." She flinched as if struck, her knuckles turning white where she gripped her portfolio. He saw it all. The shame, the humiliation, the years of carefully hidden pain were now laid bare on his desk like a financial report. He was not just a CEO, he was something more, something darker, with resources that went far beyond corporate channels. "Why?" she whispered, the single word encompassing a dozen questions. Why look into her? Why involve himself? What did he want? Dante leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Because loyalty and truth are the currencies of my world. Lies are a liability, but your lie," he paused, his gaze intense, "was not a liability. It was a weapon. A desperate one, but you used it to survive. I respect that. What I do not respect is a man like Marcus Vance breathing the air in my building." He then made his offer, a proposition cloaked in the language of business. He was officially commissioning her designs for the Elysian Tower. She would be given a contract, a salary that would eclipse anything she had ever dreamed of, and a dedicated studio within the Morty building to work. But there were conditions. She would move into a secure residence owned by the Morty Group. She would use the car service he provided. Her communication would be streamlined. He was offering her a golden cage, a gilded fortress to replace the squalid prison Marcus had built for her. "I don't want to be controlled," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Dante's expression did not change. "This is not control," he corrected softly. "This is protection. There is a difference. He will not be able to touch you. He will not be able to find you. You will be free to work, to create, to live without fear. That is my offer." In the days that followed, Alara found herself drawn into his world, a world of silent, watchful men in dark suits who materialized at doorways, of whispered conversations in Italian that stopped the moment she entered a room, of the casual, breathtaking display of wealth that was simply the fabric of his daily life. She resisted, clinging to the remnants of her independence, but the temptation of safety was a powerful anesthetic for a soul that had been in pain for so long. The fear of Marcus's shadow looming over her began to recede, replaced by the far more complex and thrilling fear of the man who had banished it. He was a constant presence, not physically, but in the seamless and comprehensive way her life was being reordered. She was safe, she was secure, but she was also undeniably his. One evening, he took her to a charity gala, an event filled with the city's elite. As she stood by his side, watching as senators and billionaires approached him with a deference that bordered on fear, she finally understood. The power he wielded was absolute, and in claiming to protect her, he had also, in the eyes of this world, claimed her as his own. And the most terrifying part was the flicker of dark satisfaction she felt, a sense of belonging in the heart of the storm. The weeks bled into a month, and Alara's new reality began to solidify, taking on the weight and permanence of a life she had chosen, even if the choice had been made under duress. The studio Dante had provided for her was a sanctuary of light and space, a place where her designs for the Elysian Tower came to life with a clarity and boldness she had not been able to access in years. The constant, low-grade fear that had been her companion for so long had been replaced by a quiet, focused energy. She was free from Marcus, cocooned within the impenetrable fortress of Dante's world. The drivers were silent, the security guards in her new building were respectful but remote, and Dante himself maintained a professional distance, observing her progress from afar, his approval or displeasure communicated through a curt nod in a hallway or a brief, incisive email about a structural detail. It was a sterile kind of safety, and at times, she felt like a prized specimen in a beautiful, glass-fronted enclosure, observed and protected, but never truly touched. The illusion of a peaceful new beginning shattered on a Tuesday evening. The project team had left for the day, and Alara remained behind in the glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor, a space colloquially known as the Cube. She was working late, immersed in the intricate details of the tower's foundation, the city lights a glittering tapestry below her. The silence of the empty office floor was her ally, allowing her to think, to create. That was why the sound of the boardroom door sliding open was so jarring. She looked up, expecting a security guard on his rounds, but her heart seized in her chest, a cold, painful fist of pure terror. It was Marcus. He stood there, his face pale and haggard, his usually immaculate suit rumpled. There was a wild, desperate look in his eyes she had not seen before, the look of a cornered animal that had nothing left to lose. "How did you get in here?" she breathed, her voice a fragile whisper. He gave a bitter, triumphant laugh. "You think your new boyfriend's little tin soldiers can keep me out? I know people, Alara. I have my ways. I told you can't get away from me." He stepped into the room, and the door slid shut behind him, sealing them in together. He began to circle the long, polished table, his movements agitated like a wolf packing its cage. "This has to stop. All of it. You're making a fool of me. You belong to me. You will come home, and you will tell Morty that you made a mistake." His voice was rising, losing its silky veneer, cracking with a raw, ugly desperation. He was unraveling. Dante's influence had clearly done more than just remove her from his grasp. It had dismantled his world, likely by calling in the debts Dante had mentioned. Alara pushed her chair back, her body trembling but her mind racing, searching for an escape. "It's over, Marcus. I'm not coming back." Her defiance seemed to ignite the fuse of his rage. In 2 quick strides, he was around the table, his hand shooting out to grab her arm, yanking her from her chair. "You don't get to decide when it's over," he snarled, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and foul. "I decide." He shoved her backward, and she stumbled, her back hitting the cold glass wall with a thud that knocked the air from her lungs. The portfolio of her designs slid from the table, scattering across the floor in a cascade of white. The whole office floor was a panorama of silent, empty desks beyond the glass, a gallery of witnesses who could not see or help. Just as his hand came up, poised to strike, the boardroom door slid open again. This time it was Dante. He stood in the doorway, a figure of absolute terrifying stillness. He took in the scene in a single, frozen moment. Alara pressed against the glass, Marcus's hand raised, the frantic, violent energy in the room. Dante's face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He did not raise his voice. He did not rush. He simply walked into the room, each step a deliberate, final beat in the drama Marcus had started. Marcus froze, his hand still in the air, his face draining of all color as he stared at the man who had systematically destroyed him. He let go of Alara as if she had suddenly become white-hot. Dante did not even look at her. His eyes, black and flat with a rage so profound it was silent, were locked on Marcus. Without a word, he closed the distance between them, his hand moving with lightning speed to grip the front of Marcus's expensive suit, twisting the fabric and tie into a makeshift handle. He lifted Marcus effortlessly, dragging him from the room. Marcus stumbled, trying to find his footing, babbling apologies and threats that died in his throat. Dante dragged him past the reception desk, past the elevators, and into the center of the vast, open-plan office atrium. He stopped under the high ceiling, the acoustics amplifying the sudden, terrified silence from the few remaining employees who were now frozen at their desks, watching the spectacle. With everyone watching, Dante shoved Marcus away from him. Then he spoke, his voice not loud but carrying with a chilling authority that cut through the silence. "This man will never set foot in this building again," he announced, his gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of his employees. "He will never come within 100 yards of any Morty property. Alara Vance," he said the name with a clear, possessive weight, "is under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that, or anyone who fails to enforce it, can see me directly." He turned and walked back toward the boardroom, leaving Marcus standing there, utterly humiliated and broken, to be dealt with by the security, who were now swarming toward him. Back in the cube, Alara had slid down the glass wall to the floor, her body racked with tremors. The adrenaline drained away, leaving behind a deep, aching cold. Dante knelt in front of her, his movements surprisingly gentle. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently took her wrist, his thumb brushing over the red marks left by Marcus's grip. The carefully constructed walls between them crumbled in that moment. She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears, and the raw, unshielded gratitude and terror of it all. "Why?" she whispered again, but this time the question was different. It was not about his motives, but about the depth of his fury. He looked at the bruise forming on her skin, and for the first time she saw a crack in his impenetrable facade. A flicker of something ancient and painful moved in his eyes. "My father was a powerful man," he said, his voice low and rough. "And a cruel one. My mother, she was a gentle woman. She learned to make herself small, to be silent, to never give him a reason. But sometimes there was no reason. I was a boy. I would hide and listen, and I swore to myself that when I was strong enough, no man would ever lay a hand on a woman in my presence again." He looked up from her wrist, his dark eyes meeting hers, and in their depths she saw the ghost of a helpless boy. "I was not strong enough to protect my mother," he said, the admission costing him more than any business deal ever could. "I will not fail to protect you." In the shared silence of that glass-walled room, surrounded by the wreckage of her past, a new and infinitely more powerful connection was forged, a bond not of business or protection, but of two wounded souls recognizing each other's scars. The aftermath of the boardroom confrontation was a profound and immediate shift in their universe. The invisible lines of propriety and professionalism that Dante had maintained were erased by the raw, public declaration he had made. He had not just protected Alara, he had claimed her, marking her as his in a way that was both terrifying and deeply, fundamentally reassuring. The dynamic between them was no longer that of a CEO and his brilliant architect, or even a protector and his ward. The shared vulnerability in the wake of the violence had stripped them down to their essential selves, and in that raw space, something new and undeniable began to grow. The distance he had so carefully cultivated collapsed, and the quiet intensity that had always simmered beneath his controlled exterior was now focused entirely on her. He became a constant presence, not just a force orchestrating her life from a distance, but a man who sought her out at the end of the day, who would appear in her studio with 2 glasses of wine, and who would simply sit in silence with her, watching her work as if her process of creation was the most fascinating thing in his world. Their first kiss was not a gentle, tentative exploration. It was a collision, born of weeks of pent-up tension and unspoken desire. It happened in his penthouse office, late one night, after a long conversation about the Elysian Tower that had drifted into more personal territory. He was standing by the great glass window, looking down at the city, and she had come to stand beside him. In the reflection, she saw the look on his face, a mixture of hunger and a strange, deep-seated sorrow that lanced her heart. When he turned to her, the space between them crackled with an energy that was almost painful. He raised a hand and gently traced the line of her jaw, his touch a stark contrast to the violence she had once known, yet possessing a power that made her entire body tremble. He did not ask for permission. He simply lowered his head, and took her mouth with a possessive certainty that stole her breath. A kiss that was a promise and a brand all at once, sealing the unspoken pact between them. From that moment, their romance became an unstoppable force, a whirlwind of passion that swept them both into its center. He was a demanding and attentive lover, a man who mapped the contours of her body and her soul with the same meticulous focus he applied to his business empire. With him, Alara discovered a part of herself she thought had been extinguished forever, a woman capable of immense pleasure, of uninhibited desire, of a deep and trusting intimacy. He, in turn, began to change. The cold, impenetrable mask he wore for the world would slip in her presence, revealing a man who could be gentle, who possessed a dry, unexpected wit, and who was fiercely, almost painfully, loyal. He promised her a future, a life where she would never have to be afraid again. He set his lawyers upon Marcus with a ruthless efficiency, not just finalizing a divorce but systematically dismantling what was left of his life, ensuring he was legally and financially neutered, a ghost who could never haunt her again. "He will not trouble you," Dante stated one evening, the words a simple, final decree. "Consider him erased." But as Alara settled into this new life, a life of unimaginable luxury and profound passion, she began to understand the true price of his protection. Being Dante Morti's woman meant she was no longer an anonymous architect. She was a symbol of his power, and in his world, symbols were often targets. The first hint of this came subtly. They were having dinner at an exclusive restaurant, a place where the waiters moved with silent deference, and every table held a titan of industry or a political heavyweight. A man from a competing table, a slick reptilian figure named Silvio Falcone, approached them. He greeted Dante with a smile that was all teeth and offered a polite, almost fawning compliment to Alara. But his eyes, as they lingered on her, were cold and calculating. It was not a look of admiration. It was a look of assessment, the way a general might survey a weak point in an enemy's fortification. Dante's entire demeanor had changed in Falcone's presence, a hardening of his posture, a chilling stillness that Alara was beginning to recognize as a sign of imminent danger. After Falcone left, the mood was shattered. "Stay away from him," Dante said, his voice a low growl. "The Falcones are our rivals. They are not honorable men." The danger became more concrete a week later. Alara had returned to her old apartment with a security escort to retrieve some personal items, things of sentimental value that she hadn't wanted to leave behind. While she was inside, her escort waiting in the car below, she found that her small, locked box of her mother's jewelry was open, its contents untouched, but with a single, perfect white feather resting on the velvet lining. It was a symbol, she later learned from a grim-faced Dante, of the Falcone family. It was not a threat of theft, it was a message. "We know where you have been, we know what you cherish. We can get to you." The realization was a cold shock. The safety Dante had built around her was a fortress, but it was a fortress under siege. The price of his love and protection was that she now had to live within the walls of his war. Her independence had been won from Marcus, but she now faced a new choice: to retreat from the danger and from Dante, or to accept that his world, with all its perils and darkness, was now her own. The promise of a future with him was inextricably bound to the price of his past. The white feather was a declaration of war, a quiet, intimate threat that changed the very air Alara breathed. The abstract danger of Dante's world was no longer a thrilling undercurrent to their romance. It was a palpable presence, a shadow that followed her even within the gilded safety of his penthouse. The security around her doubled. The silent, watchful men were no longer just at the doors of buildings, but became a constant, peripheral part of her existence. Dante's demeanor grew darker, more focused. The moments of softness and levity that she had coaxed out of him were now rarer, replaced by a grim, strategic intensity. He was a king whose queen had been threatened, and the entirety of his kingdom was being mobilized for the coming conflict. He tried to shield her from the details, to maintain the illusion of the sanctuary he had built for her, but she saw it in the late-night meetings he held in his study, in the hushed, urgent phone calls he took in Italian, and in the way he watched her now, with a fierce, protective anxiety that was almost as suffocating as Marcus's control had been. Alara refused to be a fragile piece on his chessboard. She had not survived years of Marcus's tyranny to become a helpless damsel in a mafia war. She had fought for her mind, for her career, and for her soul, and she would not surrender that agency now. "I am not a liability, Dante," she told him one night, her voice steady and firm as she confronted him in his study, where he was poring over security schematics of their building. "I am your partner. You have to treat me as one. Hiding the truth from me doesn't protect me, it weakens us." He looked up at her, his face etched with exhaustion and conflict. He saw not fear in her eyes, but a resolute strength that mirrored his own. It was a turning point for him, a realization that the woman he loved was not a treasure to be hidden away in a vault, but a queen who belonged at his side, even on the battlefield. From then on, he told her everything. He explained the long, bloody history between the Mortys and the Falcons, a rivalry rooted in old-world vendettas and new-world competition for territory and power. Silvio Falcone saw Alara as Dante's one vulnerability, a chink in his armor, and he intended to exploit it to bring Dante to his knees. The Falcones made their move on a cold, rainy afternoon. They were cleverer than to attempt a brute force assault. Instead, they engineered a crisis, a multi-car pileup in the tunnel on the route her driver always took from the office, a manufactured bit of chaos designed to separate her from her usual security detail. In the ensuing confusion, as her driver was blocked in, a second car, a nondescript black van, pulled alongside them. The doors slid open. It was a classic abduction attempt, but they made a critical error. They underestimated her. As a man reached for her door, she did not scream. Instead, her architect's mind, trained to see details and structural weaknesses, took over. She noticed the van was parked directly beside a large, exposed water main on the tunnel wall, a detail from the city infrastructure plans she had studied for the Elysian project. Using the heavy portfolio of designs she always carried, she slammed it against her own car's window with all her might. It did not break the tempered glass, but the shocking noise served its purpose, distracting the man for a split second. In that second, she used the emergency release to pop her door open, not to run, but to slam it outward into the kidnapper, sending him stumbling back against the tunnel wall. At the same time, her driver, a loyal man named Giorgio who was more than just a chauffeur, engaged the attackers. It was the window of chaos Dante's reinforcements needed. They descended on the scene in moments, a swift, brutal, and efficient counter-assault that ended the threat almost as soon as it had begun. That night the reckoning arrived. Dante was not the triumphant victor. He was a man shaken to his very core. The near miss, the reality of what could have happened to her, had broken through his legendary control. He stood before her, not as a mafia boss or a CEO, but as a man terrified of losing the one thing that had come to define his existence. "I can end this," he said, his voice raw. "A war. I will burn their entire family to the ground. It will be bloody, and it will be final. But it will drag you deeper into this hell." He was offering her a choice. He was giving her the power to decide the kind of man he would be. And Alara, looking at the man she loved, a man who held the power of life and death in his hands and was willing to lay it at her feet, made her choice. "No," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. She went to him, placing her hands on his chest, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You are more than that. You are a builder, not just a destroyer. A war will create ghosts that will haunt us forever. Find another way, a smarter way. Ruin them, Dante. But do it as Dante Morty, the CEO, not just the Don." Her words were a lifeline, a path out of the endless cycle of violence he had been born into. It was the permission he needed to be the man he was becoming for her. He did not launch a bloody war. Instead, he unleashed the full, devastating power of his legitimate empire. He used his financial resources to short their stocks, his political connections to trigger federal investigations into their front companies, and his underworld intelligence network to leak information about their illegal shipments to the authorities. It was a corporate assassination, a quiet and bloodless coup that dismantled the Falcone empire from the inside out. Silvio Falcone was not killed in a hail of gunfire. He was arrested in his boardroom for racketeering and fraud, his face on the evening news a mask of disbelief. Dante had proven he could protect her not with the violence of his father's generation, but with the ruthless intellect that had built his own. Months later, the city was calm. The name Falcone was a fatting headline. In the penthouse that was now their home, Alara stood with Dante, looking out at the city's skyline. The steel skeleton of the Elysian Tower was beginning to rise, a testament to her vision and his power, a symbol of what they were building together. He had reshaped his world for her, not by abandoning the power he wielded, but by learning to wield it differently, tempering its destructive force with the creative, enduring strength she had shown him. He had placed the more unsavory aspects of his family business into the hands of his most trusted capo, creating a buffer between that world and the one he shared with her. He was still a dangerous man. The shadows would always be a part of him, but he was her dangerous man. She had not been rescued from a prison only to be placed in another. She had walked into the heart of a storm and found not a cage, but a kingdom. And in the center of that kingdom, beside its king, she had finally found her home, a future built not on a fragile promise of safety, but on the unshakable foundation of a love that had been tested by fire and had emerged, like the tower they were building, stronger than steel.